Welcome to the show today. My guest is Chris Townsend, the Vice President of Federal for Symantec. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jason.
Let me set some context before we get started for our discussion. In May, the White House released the first ever cyber risk assessment for the federal government. The comprehensive look across 71 agencies found, generally speaking, agencies lacked threat information that led to ineffective allocations of agencies' limited cyber resources. The administration says this situation creates enterprise-wide gaps in network visibility, IT tool and capability standardization, and common operating procedures, all of which negatively impact federal cybersecurity. The White House found 25 agencies are managing risk successfully, while 59 agencies are at risk, and 12 agencies are considered high risk, where they're not managing their cybersecurity challenges well. To help address these shortcomings, OMB detailed 4 recommendations. These include increase cybersecurity threat awareness by implementing cyber threat framework to prioritize efforts and manage cybersecurity risks. Standardize IT and cybersecurity capabilities to control costs and improve asset management. Consolidate Agency Security Operations Center to improve incident detection and response capabilities. And drive accountability across the agencies through improved governance processes, recurrent risk assessments, and engagements with leadership. OMB's report highlights a myriad of what I'll call bad habits that have developed over the past decade, but it also demonstrates the constant need for cybersecurity protections to evolve. And over the past decade, the realization that agencies need to reduce complexity, have advanced protections at the data level, and maybe most importantly, take that risk management approach by focusing on the most important IT assets first. So how can agencies continue that evolution of their cyber thinking? Well, that's where my guest comes in. Once again, Chris Townsend, the Vice President of Federal for Symantec. Chris, let's just start with maybe the state of cybersecurity as Symantec sees it. You guys work with a lot of federal customers. Do you get a sense that this evolution continues, or are we stuck in running a little bit of mud here? What are you seeing from federal customers?
No, thanks, Jason. Glad to be here. The evolution certainly continues. The challenge that we have, in your introduction, you called it out very well. In the 4 findings of the threat assessment or the cybersecurity assessment, there's still a tremendous amount of complexity in cybersecurity. Most cyber environments were built out very reactively as a new threat emerged. You went out and bought a new tool, and today there's a tremendous complexity of tools without any type of integration or standardization, and it drives a tremendous amount of cost, a tremendous amount of operational complexity. And at the end of the day, complexity is the enemy of a strong cybersecurity posture. So we really need to start to move toward a more standardized approach. And we need industry leaders and government leadership to step up and start to drive toward a solving for this complexity and improving our security posture.
People hear the word complexity and they go, well, what do you mean by that? I have Einstein and I have some CDM tools. Oh, and I also have this other tool that it's not a part of Einstein or CDM. And by the way, the OMB told me I need to protect my high value assets. And now I have, data rights management tools. Is that just the layers and layers of tools you're talking about is the complexity, or is it the approach, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both, certainly. So Einstein aside, that's a separate interesting topic that we can delve into certainly. But looking at all the various layers and let's just talk on premise before we jump into cloud. But we talk on premise when we talk about the layers of security tools that are deployed, and you touched on a number of them. But you've got endpoint tools, you have network tools, you have data protection tools, you have user identity management tools. So there are great best-of-breed technologies out there to solve all these individual security needs, certainly, but those tools don't talk a common protocol or a common language to be able to share information. If you look across the rest of IT, we've seen standardization in almost every other segment of IT, whether it's networking or storage or ERP systems or operating systems. So you have that level of interoperability that doesn't exist today with security tools. So what we're forcing our very limited resources and our security operators and our threat analysts to correlate and really start to drive interoperability between the tools using a human element, which is not scalable and certainly not agile enough to respond to the state-sponsored threats and bad actors that we're facing on a day-to-day basis.
Is this lack of interoperability, this lack of standardization your fault? Meaning Symantec, McAfee, Trend Micro, you name the vendor? Or is it the opposite side, the agency's fault, because they just are shiny objecting, if you will?
Great question, and it's both. So I'll absolutely take that responsibility as a vendor. And when I go out and meet with our customers, we talk about this all the time. That we've developed a lot of capabilities in our tools. You mentioned this again in your opening around tool consolidation and standardization, and taking some of the cost out of our tool sets. And we have redundant investment in a lot of these tools. So, for example, we have an endpoint technology called Symantec Endpoint Protection. It's a very broad tool set that protects the endpoint. We've built a lot of capability into that tool set over the last few years. Shame on us as a vendor if we haven't gone in and educated our customers on how to derive more value from that existing investment. And that's been one of my core focus areas for the last couple of years that I've been with Symantec, that our account teams get out and educate our customers on, hey, you made this investment with us. Let us tell you about the additional capabilities and where you can start to consolidate some of those tools and drive down costs. Because we'll see customers that have had a threat that they had to go protect against, and they go buy a new tool, and that tool would provide a redundant capability of something they already had in SEP, for example. So it's us. And then on the other part of that question, it is a fault of the industry in terms of there was a real thought for years on vendor diversity and best of breed technology, which kind of drove this shiny object, toys to tools approach. That's caused a lot of this complexity as well. And we need to shift away from that and take more of a platform and an integrated architecture approach that we've taken in all other segments of IT.
One of the things that you bring up that's interesting is very similar to the data center optimization consolidation effort. I see a big analogy here. When OMB first started looking at data centers, back in I would say the early 2010s, they found utilization was like 15%, 20%. So when agencies needed more storage or more power, they just bought a new server versus saying, okay, is this current server at maximum capacity? And then they found a bunch of 15%, 20%ers. Do you see that same analogy? And how are agencies starting to kind of get out of that, if you will, rut of, well, we'll just buy another tool versus educating, as you said, what they already have and what they can already use?
Yeah, great analogy, spot on. So the lack of utilization or maximizing utilization of the data center tools is certainly analogous to what's happening in security today and buying these redundant tools. But it's not just a cost issue when you buy all these redundant systems. It's a security posture issue as well, because now you're creating complexity in your security environment that ends up eroding your security posture, not improving it.
One of the things that you guys are talking about is more of this integrated defense platform. And this goes back to the beginning when we talked about risk management and this idea of really trying to, if you will, buy down the risk versus just stop the threat. Because as you well know, and I think any security expert will say, you're not stopping the threat and the attacks. So maybe talk about what an integrated cyber platform really does look like.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the complexity of the on-premise environment, needing to get our arms around that and solve for the complexity and drive more interoperability and standardization. But now, if we think about the move to the cloud, and now we're adding a whole separate level of complexity on top of the on-prem environment. So, the idea that, hey, you move to cloud and you're going to drive down costs and take some of the complexity out of your environment is true. But it doesn't happen immediately. It's not a switch that you flip. You don't move to the cloud on the Wednesday, right? You move over time, and as you move, you end up standing up redundant systems. You have redundant cost redundancy. I think a lot of the agencies and the folks that are appropriating to move to or to invest in moving to the cloud don't realize that you have to absorb some additional costs in that first year or first 2 years as you move to the cloud over time. Same with your security environment. You've got a security stack or security environment on-prem. Now you need to stand up a separate security environment in the cloud. How do you do that without exacerbating the existing problem of complexity and cost? And by building an integrated security platform that extends from on-prem into the cloud. For example, a lot of agencies have stood up DLP. DLP is a very complex system when you start to stand that up. On-premise, you have to identify your high-value assets. You have to identify what you want to monitor with a DLP system. Standing that up in a cloud environment is a heavy lift. But if you can extend your on-prem DLP policies into the cloud through a cloud access security broker, through an integrated architecture, it really solves for that complexity. We have an architecture that does that, but we're also building a standards-based security fabric that we call ICDX, Integrated Cyber Defense Exchange, with a number of industry partners around open standards, leveraging Stix Taxi, leveraging OpenC2, leveraging the REST APIs that will hopefully move the industry to more of a standardized approach in starting to solve for the complexity and driving interoperability. I mean, we'd like to see our customers out there all adopt the Symantec platform, but we know that's not realistic. We really want to build a standards-based security fabric that'll drive interoperability out there and start to solve the problem.
Let me back up on one thing. You mentioned DLP, just to clarify this, data loss prevention.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure of that, because we all get lost in the acronyms. We want to be careful of that. And then the other piece of it is, I'm glad you brought up the standards-based security fabric. Where are we with that development? You said it's not just Symantec; it's a broader industry effort. Is that done? Version 1 is done per se, or is version 1 coming?
Yes, we recently announced version 1 of the ICDX fabric and the partnerships, and we have over 140 industry partners as part of that rollout. We're going to have a larger industry announcement, a rollout at Black Hat in the next couple of weeks. So you'll hear a lot more about that. But our initial release of that solution was about a month ago.
Well, congratulations, hopefully.
Thank you.
And what comes next? So I know the rollout's educating people, but Stix and Taxi, for example, has been something that I know DHS has been using. They've been really promoting this through their automated information sharing environment. What is this? How does this fabric kind of fit into kind of that broader effort? Is it just the idea of that's how we can ensure the interoperability between the different components, the different capabilities?
Well, it's a mindset shift and a different approach. So again, if you think about how we built out our security environments today, we have all these disparate tools. We need to sit down, industry and government, industry partners together and work with our federal agencies to figure out where we can solve for complexity and how we can shift away from this shiny object tools-based fragmented environment to more of an integrated platform approach. So our first step is to get the ability to implement a platform, and ICDX will give us that ability. We need to form the industry partnerships and get the communication between the various industry leaders out there. The Cyber Threat Alliance is a good example of where that's really working well. Our CEO, Greg Clark, is working closely with the CEO of Palo Alto and other industry partners to do threat data sharing between industry to solve for things like WannaCry and NotPetya and some of these other events that we've seen recently. We can leverage that platform, the Cyber Threat Alliance, to start to drive better interoperability, right? But the first step is getting the ability to implement interoperability around this common platform, get everyone to buy in, all the industry partners in our federal agencies to say, hey, this is the direction we want to go, and then start to implement it. But it's not going to be a quick process necessarily. It's going to be a mindset shift.
Standards processes like that are never the quick fix, unfortunately. If you only could just plug and play. One of the things I want to touch upon before we take a quick break is around this idea of buying down risk. And as I opened up with about the risk assessment, that agencies are very much at risk. They're not doing the things maybe necessary to ensure that they're mitigating or dealing with risks. This lack of complexity seems maybe a little bit obvious, but maybe walk me through a little bit. If there's less complexity, there's less risks. It's the same thought process as TIC. If there's less internet gateways, you have less surface area. But maybe walk me a little bit through how all of this kind of fits into this broader idea.
Yeah, the idea of buying down risk is unique in that in the past we always thought about, hey, we're going to keep everything bad out of the environment. We're going to build this hard perimeter around our systems, and we're not going to let anything in. Well, we've come to the realization that ultimately these state-sponsored threats, these focused attacks are ultimately going to get into the environment. So how do we, instead of trying to throw every dollar and every resource we have at building a hard perimeter around our environment, how do we first identify our high-value assets and then make our investments to buy down the vulnerability to those high-value assets? It's really what we mean in terms of buying down risk. So the shift for our chief information security officers, our CISOs, starts to shift away from being technology experts in building these hard perimeters and more focused on doing business analysis and understanding how to quantify the risk associated with a particular asset and how to invest our limited resources in limiting the risk around our core assets and our organization, knowing that we're probably going to get breached in some areas, but as long as our high value assets are protected, then that's success, right? So that's really the idea of buying down risk.
Are you starting to see that? Are agencies starting to really understand that issue?
Yeah, they are. They are. So we really see a shift in terms of, and that goes back to the accountability that you mentioned in your open, right? If our agency leads, our CIOs, our CISOs are more accountable, and the folks that own the budget, even the CFOs in a lot of our agencies now are more accountable in terms of protecting against cyber risk, then we're starting to apply some quantifiable metrics to how and where and to invest in our security tools to mitigate those risks, but taking more of a business approach rather than a technology approach.
And really, that's what I've heard over the last, again, 15, 20 years is the business, the business, the business. Maybe all the cyber breaches finally is getting us there. Chris, let's take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carasoft on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.